This day in sports history. It's October 1st, and on this day throughout the annals of sports history, we had a couple of famous home runs, and they both had a little infamy as well. We've all heard of home field advantage, right? Well, that took on a little extra meaning on this day, and one of the most famous fights in boxing history. Also, stick around until the end for my daily non-sports fun fact. But let's start with what happened on this day in 1932. It was Game 3 of the World Series between the Chicago Cubs and the New York Yankees. This game was played at Wrigley Field, and the Yankees had won both games 1 and 2. In the fifth inning of Game 3 of a 4-4 tie, Babe Ruth stepped to the plate against Cubs starter Charlie Root. Now, Ruth had already hit a 3-run homer off Root in the first inning. The Cubs bench and the fans packed into Wrigley that day were giving the greatest ball player in the game and the highest paid athlete in the world a hard time. The first pitch was a called strike that Ruth thought was well out of the strike zone. As he turned to argue the call with the home plate umpire, Roy Van Glaflin, the Cubs bench picked up the volume on their taunts. Ruth gestured towards them saying, "That's only one." Before Ruth could get set in the box, Root delivered another pitch, strike 2. The yelling from the Cubs dugout and the fans only got louder. Now, with the count, 2 balls and 2 strikes, what happened next lives on in baseball lore and will forever. And it still prompts the question, did he or didn't he? In film footage shot that day, the Babe stepped out of the box and he appeared to point 2 fingers towards center field. Root delivered a pitch, and the Sultan of SWAT belted a solo homer in the exact location he had just pointed. Ruth trotted around the bases triumphantly, taunting Root as he rounded first, and then he yelled at the Cubs dugout and the fans behind it as he approached third. He said afterwards he indeed called his shot, and the story quickly became legend. The Cubs catcher that day was Gabby Hartman, and he said much later that it wasn't a called shot, that instead he pointed 2 fingers toward the Cubs bench and said, "That's only 2 strikes." A guy who was at the game that day sitting behind home plate was a major leaguer, and his name was Babe Herman. Herman would join the Cubs in 1933, and he worked on the movie Pride of the Yankees with Ruth and Charlie Root many years later. And of course, the story came up.
When we made Pride of the Yankees, Ruth was out there to help us a little with the pitching in one spot. I was with Babe all the time during the picture, and it was hashed out. Ruth brought it up to Babe, and Babe said, "No, I didn't point, but it made a good story."
It's all part of the fabric of the game, and Ruth, who was already an interesting character, well, it just added to his legend. For Charlie Root, though, the incident troubled him. Just a few days prior to his death, his daughter Della was by his bedside, and Charlie shared his issue with the called shot.
I was holding his hand, and he looked at me and he said, "You know, Della, I gave my life to baseball, and I'll only be remembered for something that never happened."
The Yankees won the game 7-5 and then closed out the series with a 13-6 win the following day. The 1932 World Series would be the last that Babe Ruth would appear in. On this day in 1961, it was another famous home run that garnered a lot of attention. And of course, it was a New York Yankee doing the hitting. It was the final game of the '61 regular season, and coming into this one, Roger Maris had equaled Babe Ruth's record of 60 home runs in a season. Maris's chase had not been a popular one with Yankees fans or the commissioner's office. If somebody was going to break the Babe's record, well, Yankee fans wanted it to be Mickey Mantle. Commissioner Ford Frick had decreed back in June that unless a player broke Ruth's record in 154 games, well, Ruth's record would stand as the record for a 154-game schedule, and there would be a notation added to anybody who beat it after more games were played, the so-called asterisk. At the 154-game mark, Maris had 59 home runs. He hit number 60 September 26th in Game 159. On this day, the Yankees were playing the Boston Red Sox to close out the regular season. In the fourth inning, Maris came to the plate with 1 out and none on. Here's Phil Rizzuto with his call from that day.
Waiting to see if Maris is going to hit number 61. Here's the windup. Fastball hit deep to right. This could be it. Way back there. Holy cow, it's Holy cow, what a shot. Another standing ovation for Roger Maris. 61 home runs, and they're still fighting for that ball out there. People are climbing over each other's backs.
Maris sent a Bill Stafford pitch deep into the right field seats for home run number 61 of the year. The fan who came up with the ball was 19-year-old Sal Durante. He said he heard the crack of the bat, saw it heading in his direction, climbed onto his seat, and reached as high as he could, and the ball smacked him right in the palm. Durante said he was fortunate to even be at the game. He was broke at the time, and he was on a date with a young lady who paid the $5 for a pair of tickets. On the Red Barber call of the Maris home run, he mentions a few times that the person who comes up with the ball was going to get $5,000. Durante only wanted to meet Maris, get an autograph on his ticket stub, and give him the ball. He didn't need the money, even though he was flat broke. When he attempted to give it to Roger, Maris told him to hang on to it, saying, "Keep it, kid. Put it up for auction. Somebody will pay you a lot of money for the ball. He'll keep it for a couple of days and then give it to me." That's exactly what happened. California restaurateur Sam Gordon paid Durante $5,000 for the ball, which is about $55,000 in today's economy, and he indeed gave it back to Maris. This episode is brought to you by Stirling Roastery. For several months you've heard me talking about the great products and scents offered by the Stirling Soap Company. And while there may not seem to be any correlation between soap and coffee, what is similar is the same care and attention to detail in delivering great products to their customers. Stirling Roastery will ship great-tasting beans or ground coffee, for whatever coffee-making process you prefer, right to your door. I gave their breakfast blend a try recently, and I can tell you, it was a great way to get my day kick-started with this smooth, medium blend. And just like their soaps, they have a variety to choose from. Give Stirling Roastery a try at stirlingsoap.com. In sports, we talk a lot about home field advantage, but in this instance, I'm not exactly talking about a supportive crowd cheering for their team or the comfortability of sleeping in your own bed and making that short trip to your home ballpark. I'm talking about another advantage, the groundskeeper. Now, there are a lot of stories of groundskeepers doing their part to help out the home team. There's the story of Bill Veeck, who instructed his groundskeepers to move the fences back when the New York Yankees came to town. Or the Chicago White Sox groundskeeper who put a little mound in the baselines to keep bunted balls from their speedsters Nellie Fox and Luis Aparicio in fair territory. The Los Angeles Dodgers in the 1960s had a speedy team, and their groundskeeper was known to use a heavy asphalt roller on the outfield grass, with the hopes that a typical single may turn into a gap double or a triple. Well, on this day in 1962, there was a little controversy about whether San Francisco Giants groundskeeper Matty Schwab went a little bit too far. The Giants and the Dodgers were locked in a tight pennant chase in the final days of the season. This was the first of a 3-game series between the two, and the Giants were hosting. San Francisco manager Alvin Dart was looking for a way to slow down the speedy Maury Wills, who had stolen more than 104 bases during the 1962 season, breaking Ty Cobb's record for stolen bases in a season. Dark went to Schwab, and he asked if he could help out. And Schwab said he had a few ideas and some tricks that he'd been thinking about, and so he got to work. First, Schwab changed the dirt next to first base, the place where Wills would take a lead off of first as his preamble for swiping second. Schwab removed the hard dirt and he replaced it with a spongy, soft mix of peat and sand, and then doused it with a healthy dose of water to make sure it was nice and soft. When the Dodgers came to town, they took some batting practice. Dodgers manager Leo DeRocher noticed something strange in the infield, and he began to dig up the area around first base that Schwab had worked so diligently on. Dodger first baseman Ron Fairley built a small sandcastle out of the mixture. Home plate umpire for Game 1, Tom Gorman, saw what was going on and understood immediately the intent. He found Schwab and he scolded him that if the infield was not fixed, he would call the game a forfeit and give the win to the Dodgers. So Schwab went back to work with other members of the crew, and he removed most of the soft dirt mixture. Well, actually, they did a pretty good job of making it look like that's what they were doing. In fact, they made it softer than before, but for whatever reason, Gorman and the umpiring crew were satisfied in the moment, and Schwab ordered his guys to water the infield, which they did. A lot. In fact, they overwatered the field, soaked it down to the dismay of DeRocher and the rest of the Dodgers, and it worked like a champ. The Giants rolled to an 11-2 win, and the Dodgers did not steal a single base. The Dodgers were apoplectic after the game. A protest was sent into the National League office with the threat of soil samples being taken before Game 2 of their series. In the early morning hours of the second, Schwab and his crew went back to work removing the evidence. They added a little extra water the next day, so much so that the umps paused the action and ordered sand to be placed down on top of the base paths. Well, that turned things back to a swampy mess and had the effect that the Giants initially wanted. San Francisco went on to win the pennant and faced the Yankees in the World Series. And on this day in 1975, it was the Thrilla in Manilla. Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier had fought each other twice before, with Frazier winning their first meeting in 1971 in the so-called Fight of the Century by unanimous decision. Ali refused to accept he'd been beaten, and he battled hard for a second fight. The second meeting in 1974 lost a bit of its luster after Frazier was beaten by George Foreman. The purse for fight number 2 was minuscule by the standards of the day, but at least that one put Ali's NABF heavyweight title on the line. Ali won the second fight with a narrow, unanimous decision. So this third meeting would not have happened if Ali had not beaten George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle fight held in Zaire in October of 1974. But with Ali's surprise win against the seemingly unbeatable Foreman to add the WBA and the WBC heavyweight title to Ali's trophy case, opened it up for fight number 3 between Ali and Frazier, held on this day in the Philippines. And it got its name Thrilla in Manila after Ali's boast.
And I wrote a short poem. It says there will be a killer and a thriller and a killer when I get the gorilla in Manila. That's right.
There was a lot of pre-fight build-up for this one, and it would go down as the best fight of the year and one of the all-time great heavyweight bouts. Ali came out dancing and moving, light as a feather, floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. Through the first 4 rounds, Ali looked 5 years younger than his actual 33-year-old self. He showed his confidence by standing between rounds, leaning up against the ropes instead of taking a seat and resting. That came back to hurt him later in the fight. Frazier stormed back in the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. Ali took a seat on his stool between rounds 6 and 7, and Ali's trainer Angelo Dundee lamented the loss of those rounds later. Ali was a talker during fights as much as he was before one. When he came out for the 7th round, Ali called Frazier Old Joe and said, "I thought you were washed up." Frazier first responded with his mouth, shouting back, "Somebody told you all wrong, pretty boy," and then did more talking with his fists. One thing that limited Ali in this fight was his inability to use the clinch to his advantage. In their second meeting, Ali had used that maneuver on Frazier 133 times. The referee for this fight, Carlos Padilla, made it clear early on that Ali would not be able to get away with unlimited clinches in this one. By the 11th round, Frazier was ahead on the cards and he looked primed to take the title back. But Ali began an assault in the 12th round that continued for the following 2. In the 13th, Ali landed a solid left and followed that up with a huge right that caused the lights in Joe's eyes to dim a good bit. By the end of the 13th, momentum had swung back to Ali. In the 14th, The champ landed several combinations and at one point connected on 9 consecutive right hands to a half-blind Frazier. When the bell rang, ending the 14th, Padilla had to guide Frazier back to his corner. Well, at that point, Frazier's trainer, Eddie Futch, told his fighter, "Sit down, son, it's all over. No one will ever forget what you did here today." Frazier protested, but Futch was already cutting off his gloves. The fight was over. Ali had won. After the fight, there was a great deal of respect shared back and forth between the two men. Ali told Frazier's then 14-year-old son Marvis, who would step into the ring in a few years himself, that "Your father is a great man and a great fighter. Never forget that." Frazier returned the compliment, saying, "I've seen walls tumble under shots that I gave him. He's a great champ." And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. If you happen to be traveling to Thailand sometime in the future, just be respectful and don't do what these two numbnuts did. 2 American tourists, of course they were, toured Bangkok's Temple of the Dawn. Now, like a lot of travelers, they took selfies of themselves at this religious site. But, and this is a big but, pun intended as you will soon learn, they exposed their backsides in the pictures at the holy site and then posted those pictures on their Instagram account. They were detained a few days later at the airport for violating the conservative country's Computer Crime Act. If convicted, they faced 12 years in a Thailand prison. Fortunately for them, they only had to pay a $150 fine. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.